Welcome to our 60th podcast. Today we'll be talking about best practices in strategic workforce management and preparing organizations for personnel changes with our very special guest, Elisabeth Constantin. What's one thing you can do now to prepare for succession and transition intentionally while preserving your brand? Keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces.
Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back to our podcast. I'm Rich Cruz. I'm an organizational development consultant, and I am joined by my co-host, Cheryl
Hi, Rich.
Volpe.
Hi, everyone.
And we are joined here with Elisabeth Constantin. How are you, Elisabeth?
Yeah, I'm great. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself to the audience?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Elisabeth Constantin. I'm the owner of Abrio Executive Services in Nashville. We are a nationwide executive outplacement provider. So we come in high-profile exit scenarios and partner with corporate HR departments and corporate legal departments when they have to terminate executives at the director, president, or C-level, and want to provide the departing leader with market reentry services as part of the severance package. So what that means is essentially that we help senior leaders in times of massive change and also financial and professional uncertainty to help them get ready for market, for the executive's job search, and secure the next position.
That's awesome. So, I mean, it seems like the companies that you work for, I have rarely seen a company that has the conscientiousness to say, we're going to help the executives move into something else, right? Is that a rare thing that you've seen?
Well, I would say it's more common than you'd think. It's just not very well known because executive careers after a certain level are sort of secretive in nature. But I will say the companies who care about their employer brand and building trust with their employee base, they will offer that, not just at the senior executive level, but also at the middle management level. That's not our area. We only come in for those top level terminations, but it is a service called outplacement support. And I would say it's fairly common.
That's great. Okay. And so I did a little bit of looking out there, and it seems like the tenure for executives, and there are a few places that have talked about this, has reduced in the last few years. Yeah, is that a fair assumption? Because I've seen that like the average tenure was somewhere around 7 years, and now it's like 4.5 years or so.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It's certainly something that I observe in our business. Executive positions have always had a shelf life, really, because the board makes changes or a new CEO will make changes. And then someone comes in and quote unquote cleans house because they want to bring in their own people. Or there's business activity like mergers and acquisitions that create redundancies. But I would say, yeah, I mean, those numbers, the world is becoming more fast paced, and we certainly see that from a change perspective, especially at the top. So yeah, you're right on.
Well, this is a kind of business change that, Cheryl, I don't think we've talked too much about, right? Is the exit of personnel in general, right? But then the exit of executives specifically.
It's
right?
true. And I think, Elisabeth, we focus a lot of our conversations on the onboarding process and what does a company offer an employee so that they feel engaged from the moment that they arrive, and how is that training? Do they get an understanding of the corporate culture? Do they fit in? If they don't, is there conflict? And these are the things that we tend to focus on. But the idea of planning your exit strategy in those early stages of your arrival at the executive level is very interesting. And I think that companies, as a rule, don't there's an exit interview, which is pretty standard across the board, right? And it's sort of that like
Yeah.
it's usually feels like a CYA kind of thing, right? There's no reason you're leaving that you didn't tell us yet, right? That kind of thing. So if you
Yeah.
could explain to us, why is the offboarding just as important for a company's reputation, or what, the way they handle you going out is as important as the way they handle you coming in?
Yeah.
If there's a
I
little
would
share.
say, yeah. Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that I'm trying to figure out how I want to answer this question and what angle I want to take when I answer it, because at a certain point with large companies, that exact conversation, Cheryl, that you referenced, the exit planning for people, it's almost a philosophical question and not a business question. Because in large
Mm,
companies, there's plenty of money to go around to like hire and terminate the right way. But it comes down to a philosophical question of like, how do we value people? And um, do we, if we say people are our most important assets, do we live those values until the very last day of the employee's life cycle? And if we don't, what does that mean to our employer brand? Because if you don't, it's a little hypocritical, right?
yeah,
And also, what does it mean to build trust with our existing workforce? Because word always gets out on how people are getting treated on the way out, right? And if you think
sure.
about companies who are doing like mass layoffs over Zoom, it's obviously very undignified. And that's not how it works at the top levels, because it's a lot more concierge and boutique on how people are being let go behind closed doors. But it still sends a message, right? And at the executive level, like this is especially important. Providing support is important at every level, but at the executive level, it's especially important because of how long executive search can take senior leaders. 6 months to 12 months runway to find that next opportunity in the hidden job market where 80% of roles are being found through a network is not unheard of. So when we come back to the conversation that every executive role has a shelf life, everyone's always hedging and trying to beat the clock, right? Because you have to
Mhm.
factor that economic downtime, the transition piece, into your overall financial situation. So you almost kind of have to bake it in. So it's important for the leader to be prepared for change. Everyone, really, because everyone is replaceable. Even the CEO can be removed from the board. But at the company level, it's really important from a values proposition. And I know you play in that sandbox a lot as
Yeah.
well.
We talk a lot about corporate culture, right?
Mhm.
And I like to reference Ed Schein's model of you've got these underlying assumptions. If you imagine the iceberg, right? The underlying assumptions, and then that is the espoused values, and those are the kind of the underwater parts, and then the part that everybody sees is the artifacts, which is the outward signs and symbols and behaviors that reflect those values, right? When you're working with an organization and you're seeking one as a prospect or a partner, uh, do you look at the culture and decide, hey, this is somebody that I can work with, or has that been something that's been a consideration for you?
Yeah. So I would say that, I'm in the fortunate position that companies find us because at that level, it's all like recommendation and word of mouth. Excuse me.
Sure.
Um, but I will say that naturally, the companies who come to me are companies that I want to work with because they naturally have their heart in the right place about providing support on the way out and providing better support. So naturally, that is a fit because it shows me that they care, right? Um, and Yeah, I would say it's pretty much a natural fit and alignment
Okay.
normally. Yeah.
Oh, right on.
I don't have to look at it as deeply as maybe you have to do in your line of work because I am not on the inside, right? We catch the person with empathy if something happens, if a VP marketing or a CFO or, head of accounting or senior HR leader, if someone gets let go, we catch them and then we work with them, but we're not on the inside, which
Got it.
would be a conflict of interest.
Understood.
Sure, sure.
Understood.
And speaking of
Yeah.
conflict of interest, I also would like to ask you, when a person is leaving a company, an executive at the higher level, these sort of, inner working, more secretive processes at the top, because of NDAs and confidentiality, what percentage of the people that you work with would you say are likely to be an ally at their new company with to the company that they're leaving? Are there a lot of burned bridges in your work, or is that careful transition, what percentage does it have to do in general to, well, you don't want to burn the bridge here because you may, and you don't want to kick this person out unceremoniously because they could join an ally that could be advantageous to you to stay on good terms.
Yeah. Fascinating question. I would say that um, at that level, people sign pretty comprehensive exit paperwork, so they cannot really say a whole lot, even if they wanted to.
Sure.
But I would say whether they will or won't is largely dependent on the kind of quality of service that they get on the way out, right? Because
Mhm.
no one ever is going to be happy that their job with ABC Fund Corporation ended, right? That's never something where anyone is like, oh my God, I'm so glad I got fired, Unless they have secured their severance on the way in and there's just the money train just keeps running and where an exit is actually really, really good financially. Most people fail to do that and negotiate their terms on the way in. So
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it comes back down to like, how are they treated on the way out? Is someone saying, is it a transaction where it's like, today is your last day, here's your paperwork, please sign? Or do the people on the other side of the table say, with a empathetic sense of authenticity, are people being trained, HR and the manager who's leading the termination, are they trained to say, what you did for us mattered,
Sure.
right? And thank you. Because that's something that people very really rarely hear. And that is, after years of loyalty and service, is something that tends to make a lot of people pretty upset. And understandably so, and I believe, right? There's a right way and a wrong way to let people go with empathy or not. And then I think the other thing is like, coming back to the kind of support they get on the way out. Again, no one's going to be happy that, they had an unexpected exit. But if we can get them to a place where 6, 12, 9, 12 months later, they look back and they were like, look, I'm still not happy that it ended, but I respect the company that I got really good quality support to help me find my next opportunity. That is what's going to move the needle on how they're going to talk about their past employer. And in the executive top level world, C-suite, that matters and it will get around.
Right.
Right
Because at the
on.
end of the day, it's rarefied at that level too, right? And it's probably not a very small world. You know who's
It's not.
the
Yeah.
CEO, you know who his or her team is, and you become fairly intimate with those names too.
Yes. And they all poach from each
Mm,
other. So, it's a word will get out about where people may or may not want to work, and employers
Mm.
need to be mindful of that. And it's an easy metric to dismiss because it's hard to measure. It's a soft measurement thing, right? But you can measure engagement, but it's you know, well, actually, I think you can also
disengagement.
monitor like yeah, disengagement and also trust. Like that's your world, right? Measuring trust and psychological safety within your company. This
For
is
sure.
all Yeah. Do you find that companies like, this is interesting for me, like, do companies pay attention to that from an exit perspective? Do you see that?
Well, hold on. Let's do this. I'd love to answer that question because
Good one.
I've seen a couple of different scenarios here, but let's take a quick break. And when we come back, let's pick that up. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. We'll be right back.
At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well-executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.
And we're back. So we've been talking about something again we haven't really talked enough about. I think is the offboarding of and the transition of executives out of an organization and how that impacts their brand. And Elizabeth, before we left, you had asked us a question about like what we've seen. Yeah, is that fair? Was that the question?
Yep.
Yep. So I personally, I've seen it happen in both ways. I've seen really, really sloppy, unfortunate removals of executives in the past where there wasn't really a great transition and there wasn't a lot of communication with the rest of the team. You know, it's the person's here and now they're gone. You know, and it's just
Yeah.
like, what do we do now? You know, the throne is abdicated. Where do we go with this? You know, so I've seen that, but there have been a handful of times, and it's for me, it's the minority of the time, but I've mostly worked at small businesses, not big ones, right? Where there is a level of conscientiousness where the ownership takes the time to prepare their thoughts beforehand and help the executive get from one place to another. I've actually been in that position, frankly. And then introduce the rest of the staff to what's happening, right? So, but that again, that's for me, that's the rarity.
Yeah, it's not every situation is a today is your last day kind of conversation, right? Like, and I would say to your point, businesses who do this well, misconduct and things like that is obviously different, right?
Oh,
But
yeah,
in
totally
M&A
different.
situations and things like that, there is actually runway. And the best thing that HR departments who are strategic about helping people find their next opportunity can do is to give them runway, because it is always easier for someone to find their next opportunity while they on paper still have a job and are still with the company. So that's where sometimes I see 3 months, sometimes I see 6 months, like year end, like it gives everyone time to even hire the successor and like train them. And it's a lot less abrasive and abrupt, because then people can plan. So to your point, yeah,
Right.
sometimes it's today is your last day. But at the top, usually the writing is on the wall for like a good bit of time before it
Yeah.
actually happens. Yeah.
Right, sure. And that's that level of discretion and confidentiality, depending on how buttoned down a culture is. Those things can stay behind closed doors until that day it
Yeah.
is your last, right? For me, I
Yeah.
had the fortunate circumstances of resigning myself to transition to a new job when I left corporate, and then the creative stand of my career, just there was a natural ending cycle because of the nature of entertainment. So in the first case, I was very much looking forward to leaving behind what I had experienced in a good way for 15 years. And I was relocating completely. So looking forward to that.
Mm.
When it came time for the exit interview, I don't even really remember it. I was my sights were so already set on the future away from that
Yeah.
environment. And then the second time, it was again just a natural cycle of an ending of seasons. And I think in both cases, though, the heavy lifting, and maybe you both experience this too, tends to be in that legal aspect, in that paperwork. And once the lawyers have signed off on an appropriate level of NDA, et cetera, then I haven't seen many other people care that much about what happens in that last conversation, you know? So again, it speaks to that level of how does the company care for their people when they leave? And it wasn't that I wasn't cared for, it was just different circumstances. And
Yeah, right.
again, that level of skill level, depending on the people that are, having those conversations with you and what's at stake. Does the company need to stay friends with you? Do you need to stay friends with the company? Are you moving into a competitor's realm? Are you just completely leaving the industry altogether? All those things factor into how that conversation goes too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely very complex. And sometimes those conversations are more authentic than others because even though if you resign, for example, voluntarily, you don't have to share where you're going. And sometimes it's wise not to, but like that's more the, personal transition type stuff. But yeah, no, I hear you. Makes
I
no
have a
sense.
friend who
For
was
sure.
pressured quite heavily to reveal where she was going. And this is in New York City
Oh yeah, I
recently.
bet.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And she did
Yeah.
not
Hmm.
give in.
Yeah. It's like you'll find out on LinkedIn just like
That's
everyone else
exactly what
when
she
I decide that you're gonna find.
she can't wait
Yeah.
for that minute.
That's right.
Yeah.
On your own terms.
On your
Yep.
own terms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
That, so Cheryl, you had a question for Elisabeth,
I
yeah?
did. I did. So in my following your progression and your progress and the impending launch of your book, I see you use this language of protecting your downside and how important this is in one's career. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, certainly. So it's multifaceted, right? Like, so protecting your downside is obviously tied to a lot of self advocacy and the overall negotiation, you know, in the overall negotiation space, not just like total comp, but also benefits to make sure that your compensation stays competitive for years down the line and it's not immediately compressed after 1 year in the company. But more importantly, if we're talking about executive exits, it's how do I say this? At a certain level, the game is being played differently, starting at the director, sometimes at the VP level, where people start to negotiate their severance on the way in. So they
Mhm.
have full clarity on what is provided when the shelf life expiration dates for their executive role comes to fruition, and there's not a surprise on the way out. So, what that means is that at the VP level and certainly at the C-suite level, people bring in legal counsel on the way in to negotiate, get that severance, and the conditions in which severance will apply get locked in before they join the company because that's when their leverage is high. If you think about sometimes how exit circumstances are, it's not always, hey, we have an M&A and a redundancy. It's a business situation. Sometimes these situations can be very personal, right?
Sure.
Someone barks up the wrong tree and, trust is eroded and there's no path forward. No, there's no amount of coaching that can fix it. Relationships are being burned. Like hired for skill and fired for personality is still very much a thing. And in those kind of situations on the way out, you don't have a lot of leverage left to negotiate your exit. And sometimes the budget has already been set. That's more the case on middle management layoffs when there's a larger budget for like payouts and things like that. But yeah, it very much comes down to protecting your post-exit circumstances and locking that in on the way in. And it's not very well known. And it's one of those lessons that a lot of first-time VPs or first-time C-level people learn the hard way when they don't know. And then in hindsight, the regret is always fierce. Either I wish I had known, or dang it, I wish I had tried.
Well,
And
Right.
both are
Right.
not good realizations to have when liquidity is at stake. And I think one thing that I can add is, like, as an executive outplacement transition provider, we obviously see a lot of interesting transition circumstances. And one thing that continues to surprise me after years of doing this work is how paycheck to paycheck a lot of even very tenured leaders live. And when something happens and they get the pink slip, they're like, I never saw this coming. I didn't expect this ever to happen to me. I'm not, prepared for it financially. Liquidity is at stake, and I'm selling a vacation home and I'm pulling the kids out of private school. Like, that should not, change is a part of business. It shouldn't be a surprise. So
Right.
I talk about that a lot in the book. Like, executive terminations are a little bit like how people view like major health scares. At some point, they happen to everyone, but everyone walks through life that it only ever happens to other people. That's not being realistically prepared for the downsides of life.
Right.
Right.
So
Right.
if I understand everything you said, and it's just such a great, great explanation for, there are downsides to every aspect of life, right? But what you
Yes.
do specifically is be thinking about that downside now, because as you progress through your career, as you achieve your success, as your financial success increases, so will your spending, so will your lifestyle, so will your habits,
And so will your
and so
risk.
will your risk.
because the pendulum always swings the other way at some point. Like, no one stays at the top forever, right?
Right.
Even the
Right.
CEO who can be removed from the board, or like, there's no such thing as stability. And we live in a world where, whether we like it or not, it's a business reality that as long as you work for someone else, you're always replaceable. In fact, even if you don't work for someone else, you're still replaceable. Like, if a client decides to like walk,
That's
and
right.
we all know that as entrepreneurs, right? But you
Yeah.
have to prepare long and be ready long before the writing's on the
Well,
wall. You're exactly right,
a
Cheryl.
shameless plug for us. Our tagline is "Make change your friend," and it is all these reasons and
Yeah.
more, because it will be there.
Yeah.
Right.
Change readiness doesn't happen when the change happens. It happens long before then.
Right. There's you've hit so many nerves for me in the transition through my career, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And just you look back, hindsight's 2020, but now I'm like, oh yeah, you should really negotiate that on the front end. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be. That makes
When
a
you
lot
have
of
the most
sense.
leverage, where
And
you are the attractive new thing coming in. You are magnetic, and that makes so
that's
much
right.
sense.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Leverage that.
we should have a secondary tagline: "Make your lawyer your friend."
Yeah. Yeah.
And make your executive placement coach your
And your
friend.
financial
Yeah.
planner, and maybe
That's right.
your therapist. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
And maybe
complete
a
exactly.
package
therapist.
I
with a
say
lid
this,
there,
I
all
have
tagged
this.
in there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I say this in the book. Like, for executives, the best way to like predict the future is with the help of a good lawyer. And
That makes sense.
it's not
It's
wrong.
not wrong.
It's not wrong. Not
It's
wrong.
not wrong.
Well, let's do this. Let's take another quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about the quality of this exiting uh, process. Does that make sense?
Great.
Right on. Okay. We'll be right back.
Meet Hermie the HR Hermit Crab. Laugh, learn, and lead better with Hermie. Hermie is here to tackle workplace madness with heart and humor from Harmonious Workplaces. He's perfect for HR pros, leaders, and change makers. Hermie teaches workplace lessons through cartoons and is great for team discussions and workshops. Get your copy on Amazon now. www.hermiehrhermitcrab.com. Again, that's hermiehrhermitcrab.com.
And we're back. So we have been talking about, and thank you so much for being here, Elizabeth. This is a great conversation. And
Thank
we've
you.
been talking about the transition of executives specifically here, right? And one of the before we went to the break, we were talking about, can we define what does good quality executive outplacement support look like? Could you give us kind of what is what does that quality mean? Like that's something that I think especially people who are unfamiliar with, like I
Yeah.
am, where
What
again
quality
you've
looks
touched
like.
on all the fears that I've had in my career. What is that?
What are
What
all the ways
should
that could have been better
companies
for
aspire
Rich,
to?
Elizabeth?
Yeah. Well, I had my answer, but I think I'm going to go off script. Quality support in this space at the top level is concierge and bespoke, not
Mm.
cookie cutter and one size fits all. So, did you ever watch the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney, like from 10 years ago? Yeah,
Oh, a lot. Yeah.
he's this like abysmal outplacement provider that like travels around the country and fires people in the most horrible, unempathetic kind of way. Yeah. So he's like, here's a brochure. And then the days the world would be like, here's a YouTube video on how to find your next job. So I would say, yeah, quality support is not George Clooney.
Okay.
That
Sorry,
sounds
George Clooney.
Sorry,
Yeah,
George.
that sounds really bad. I'm probably going to get sued for that line. So I will up my business insurance today. No, but quality support. Yeah, that was so bad. That came out the wrong way, but
The
yeah, that's
character
fine.
George
Um,
We
Clooney
so
love you, George
quality.
played.
Clooney.
Hey, maybe you'll get him as your podcast, listener. No. Yeah. So I would say quality support is more than like the basics, right? Of like a 15-minute conversation with a consultant who gives you some quick feedback on your resume and then a YouTube video on how to find your next jobs and interview tips, right? At the top level, it's a lot more bespoke than that. So where we are different as a company is that we actually write the document for the departing leader. We write the resume and the LinkedIn profile. Most people can't do that on a good day. Well, and they certainly can't do it in a time of massive change and economic uncertainty. So we do
Right.
that. And then we also do a lot of like concierge consulting to getting them ready for the executive search process because it's a different world beyond the senior management realm, right? Like you heard me say earlier, 80% of positions at that level are being sourced through a network, not through direct applications, because oftentimes the positions aren't even posted anymore. So how do you navigate the hidden job market? How do you navigate the agency world? And then we
Right.
also educate things on topics like how and why you should negotiate severance on your way in the next time to protect your downside. How do you weave legal into an already really complex, high stressed, multi-swim lane negotiation process? And we can do interview training. It really depends on how much the company wants to provide to the departing leader, which is often depending on level. But that's what sets us apart from some of the, I would say, more larger providers who focus predominantly on like middle management layoffs, which is something that we do not touch.
And I would imagine that
Got it.
another element that you're providing as a service can bridge that gap between a confident person and a person who might not feel as confident about what they're bringing to the table. Not everyone can swagger into a room and demand all of these things and be comfortable with what they're asking for. And you can help provide some of that confidence to have those conversations at this time, right?
Yeah, and it's especially an important point because one of the things that always hits senior executives the most, especially the ones who are going through a personal, exit for the first time is that their market value is down, kind of
Yeah.
like a football player after a maybe not so great season. The phone isn't necessarily ringing, and these are people who are used to a very high level of status and power where people always would cater to them. So for them to actually have to fish for the first time for work in what is often a very long time is a major stress test to their
Sure.
resilience. And it's difficult for them to walk that alone. And that's where I feel, a lot of the work we do is obviously like concierge, high skilled outplacement support. But a lot of the work we do is empathy work and building confidence. And everyone needs that, especially after a change like that.
Even you, Rich.
Thanks, Cheryl. Oh, I do have a question about that. Because you had mentioned there that the time after like looking for the next role can be lengthy, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So do you find that having high quality executive outplacement support, does that tend to shorten that window a little bit for the executive? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because going back to 80% of executive roles being found through your network, quality connections in an executive's networks, which would be C-level leaders, CEOs, board directors, high-profile agency contacts in the large search firms like Korn Ferry or Heidrick and Struggles or Egon. These people will not stick their neck out for you if your presentation is a mess, right? If your
Right.
document isn't in the best shape, people will not send it forward. If your documents don't show the value and the financial impact of your work, whether you help them make more money or save money, the value proposition isn't clear, your ability to influence at the top isn't clear, that will prolong the search process. At the end of the day, that's not the only factor. It's really how hard is the departing leader willing to hit the road and contact the network and reach out. That's a big one. But yeah, if the presentation isn't there, it's going to be a barrier. It's going to take even longer.
Such a
Sure.
great point. Such a great reminder. Companies like Korn Ferry, et cetera, they won't advocate for you. They won't go to bat for you if they don't, you can't sell them first.
And that's good practice anyways, right? To keep your house in order. Because if we go back to the fact that there's no certainty, then, it's probably a good idea to keep your materials updated with your metrics and impact while you have access to them. Because once you can no longer access your performance reviews and, other, important materials that showcase the impact of your work, then become a little more difficult to
Sure.
sure, tailor all that back.
Now I'm thinking, I know we're coming up on time here, but as an organizational development consulting practice, Harmonious Workplaces, when we are talking with organizations, it seems like we should be advising HR departments to adopt this type of outplacement support, right? I will say though, one thing that I'm challenged by with this is that HR, and I'm teaching an HR class. We just finished strategic HR last week, right? HR struggles to find a place at the table sometimes. Even if you have a CHRO, right? Do you have any tips for an HR organization that, or and when I say that, like the HR department, right? How they might be able to influence, because they may be bought into this soup to nuts, right? How they might be able to convince the executives of the board or whoever the decision makers are to put something like this into play.
Yeah. I would say that hopefully by the time James comes around, they already have a seat at the table, so they can advise, and they don't have to just insert themselves at the table for the first time at that point in time, right? Like, so I've worked in two large major corporations in HR, and not just there, but like also in other companies. The complaint that comes from the business a lot often is that HR is not strategic. They don't understand our business.
Right.
And that is not always incorrect, because the HR COE skill set is a very different skill set from being in the business, selling, and being in front of the customer, understanding the products. So hopefully the organization has HR leaders that have a fundamental understanding of the products and services of the company, so that they can talk to the business more from a business perspective, in addition to from an HR perspective. But I would say that if not, it may be valuable for HR leaders to really dig deeper into the business, whether it's spending time with critical functions from a job shadowing perspective. Just that line of sight and insight, it goes a long way in terms of building trust and credibility at the business level, and you don't get dumber from doing it. And HR departments are often stretched thin, and there's not always time. But I think understanding the business at a deeper level is at the forefront of everything. And then if you understand the business and you know the people, then it's easier to get invited to the table versus kicking the door open yourself.
That's
Such
right.
great insight, Elisabeth. You're absolutely right. And
What do you recommend to companies who struggle with that kind of feedback with HR departments? Like, what do you advise?
I would just like to say, I think it starts with those conversations that you're talking about. Go into an executive's office and say, I don't just want to be called in here when you have to let someone go, when there's a compliance issue, or when payroll has to go up or down. I want to be a part of the strategic vision so that I can better service the employees and the company overall, right? Starting those conversations and not being afraid to have them, and coming out of your office, essentially, is what I would say.
Yeah. I always think that the best HR people that I've ever worked with are also incredible business people, right? Because they understand the product, they understand financials. And for some areas in HR, that's easier than for others. But it's a learning story that continues throughout the entire career if you stay in HR.
Sure. From my perspective, I'm I'm a firm believer in lead with the data, right? So if you in strategy, start with vision, mission, understand where you're going, but before you get to your objectives, you've got to analyze where you're at externally, internally, and like you said, HR departments stretched thin. They may not have the bandwidth to look at all that data and parse it out into something that makes sense. So sometimes bringing in that third party to who do that kind of work, and especially from the outside, because you have that perspective, can make a difference, in observing what the effectiveness and design of the organization, all that looks like. So you can then lead with that and say, hey, here's where we're at right now, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And from an executive standpoint, we have a risk if you don't take care of these executives from the top, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And, if you think about how companies and people sometimes tend to operate, business leaders take that feedback and the data a lot more seriously when they're paying for it from the outside versus listening to their own internal people. So they need you.
And it needs you too.
We have a comic strip for Hermie, the HR hermit crab, where his team decides bringing in a consultant will get us more likely, a more honest feedback.
Absolutely.
During
Yes,
an engagement
absolutely.
survey. Yes.
That's right.
I'm a big
Awesome.
fan of Hermie. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah. I hope he'll have his own Instagram
Hermie loves
account.
you too. He does. He does have an Instagram
He
account.
does.
Yes,
Okay.
Hermit HR Hermit Crib. Yes,
Oh my
yes. Go
God.
find him. Yes, absolutely.
He does. He
So
doesn't have a lot of
awesome.
time to be on
Well,
his socials.
Yeah, he's
and
busy
it's
consulting.
really hard with those claws. Awesome. Well, Elizabeth, uh, can you tell us first of all how can people get in touch with you? Can you tell us about your book launch that's coming up like in a day from today? Is that right?
Yeah, tomorrow.
That's right.
Oh,
Yeah, so people can
wait.
get in.
So
Sorry.
it will be out almost a week by the time this posts. So
That's true. This is
listeners,
true. But
find it.
right.
Yeah, thank you. So people can get in touch with me over LinkedIn, Elisabeth Constantin, or through our website, www.theabriofirm.com. And the book, Like a Boss, is coming out on April 30th, both as a Kindle and print. And it is a book for emerging leaders or even established leaders who have maybe a few gaps to close in the self-advocacy space. So it touches on a lot of the things that we teach private clients and clients who come to us through an executive outplacement offering as part of the market reentry learning curriculum. Like, how do you protect your downside? How do you build pathways that can be lucrative past your corporate careers into board service or academia, rich, right? So we talk a lot about like those kind of things, like how to level up and be prepared for change, because it
Awesome.
always comes. Make change your friend. That's a nice way to
Wonderful.
end the conversation. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well,
Thank you.
whoa. Thanks a million for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll make sure that we put the link to the book and your socials and all that into our show notes, which you'll find at harmoniousworkplaces.com. And I think we're at that point, folks. So
Yeah.
cheers to you.
Thank you so
And
much for having me. That was
thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Until
I
we
need a
meet
cup
again.
like that.
You know
Maybe
what?
for next time.
I may have to send it to you.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Elizabeth.
Well,
You're most
until
welcome.
next
Thank
time,
you. Cheers. Have a great day.
you too. Make change your friend.
Bye, Ginger.
Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.